Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from around the world. From Australia, India, Italy, Germany, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, UK, and Vietnam. Welcome, Mabuhay, Wan Yin Dai Cha. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are here with us at the Consumer Healthcare Training Academy webinar under the series of 2021 Health and Wellness Will Be Different. Today's topic is about unlocking critical moments of care from the consumer journey to the guided experience. Before I introduce our speakers and moderator for today, we are encouraging everyone to think about these questions while listening. What excites you? What concerns you? What would you like to know more about? What ideas do you have? And please feel free to pop those questions, ideas, and thoughts in our chat box. Our speakers will answer your or some of your questions towards the end of our session. And now, let me introduce our speakers and moderator for today. Our first speaker is Mr. Chris Clarke, the Chief Growth Officer and a founding member at Hello Health Group. Chris has supported and has been supporting the company's expansion and growth across Asia since its inception in 2015. He is an experienced growth driver who relishes the complexity of today's brand and business challenges and knows how to harness digital platforms and services to create consumer engagement throughout the entire health and wellness journey. His focus is on ensuring digital performance leadership of the Hello Health platforms and digital assets. Chris holds a degree in mathematics and economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And prior to joining Hello Health Group, Chris has held a number of senior roles in digital and technology startups across Southeast Asia, including Senior Regional Project Management for Zalora Group in Singapore and as Marketing Manager for Zalora Vietnam. Our second speaker for today is the Chief Strategy Officer at Hello Health Group, Mr. Graeme Read. Graeme's passion includes creating and developing life-changing ideas that will improve the health of humanity. He is also driven by a commitment to help health and wellness brands and businesses play a more meaningful role in people's lives. Graeme has 25 years of health and wellness advertising and communication experience in both strategic and commercial sides of the businesses. He held various senior regional and global positions on both client and agency sides in New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, China, India, and the UK. Graeme brings with him also a wealth of experience across pharmaceuticals, consumer health, nutrition, nutraceuticals, medical devices, diagnostics, healthcare services, medtech, vaccines, natural remedies, and behavioral change programs in social marketing, public health. We are equally honored and excited to have Mr. Dave McCaughan as our moderator for today. Dave has over 30 years of reach experience in globally known advertising and communication companies, and he has led Asia Pacific strategy planning, insights, and market researches for various famous brands. Dave is one of the most sought experts when it comes to insight and foresight of consumer behavior and brands. He has over 500 appearances globally and is a frequent writer and author for Advertising Age, Campaign Asia, Research World, and many other regional publications. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, help me please in welcoming our speakers and moderator for today, Mr. Chris Clarke, Mr. Graeme Read, and Mr. Dave McCaughan.
Wow, what an intro. It's embarrassing, isn't it, guys? This is great. It's really good to be back at another one of these sessions for CHC. The consumer journey, the way in which people go about the pathway to getting help with their healthcare is always an interesting subject and something that I personally have been interested in for a long time. This session is extra good because I'm doing it with an old friend, Graeme Read. We figured out yesterday we've known and worked with together for 25 years. Obviously, I must have met him when he was 12. And it's great to be with Chris Clarke. Chris has got a fascinating take on things, and the work he's been doing with Hello Health has been great. In one of the first of these sessions, I talked about the way in which many trends, rather than a new normal, many of the trends we're seeing are really the speeding up of what's been happening in the last few years, and trends that we expected to happen. And one of those certainly has been e-health, that we've talked about for a number of years, and the way in which, you know, we thought that that would really take over the way in which we approach things. People have been projecting it for decades, but I guess what we're really seeing is that the COVID times and beyond are making that all a reality. So we're going to spend the first 40 minutes or so of this session with Graeme and Chris taking us through some thoughts with a couple of gentle interruptions in mind. And then eventually we will get to questions that you want to post, and a reminder, you can do that on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please do send us your questions and we'll try to deal with them. So over to you, Chris and Graeme, to get us started.
Great. I'll take it from the start. So thanks, Dave, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. So I'm just going to start with a very brief introduction into Hello Health Group to give you some context into what we do and in a way why we're here to speak, and in a way where we come from in terms of our ability to share some insights. So I'll jump right in. So Hello Health, as was mentioned in the introduction, we were founded in 2015, first launched in Vietnam, and now we've expanded across Southeast Asia and Asia. We're now in 9 markets. Our vision of Hello Health is to lead Asia in the democratization of health and wellness knowledge and services. And our mission is ultimately to empower millions of people to make more informed decisions and to live healthier and happier lives. And we do this by providing consumers and patients with medically reviewed, relevant, and engaging health and wellness knowledge through our various local language platforms and digital channels that we operate in. And so we're really consumer and patient engagement experts. We've spent years now honing and improving ways in which we engage and reach health conscious audiences across Asia in multiple languages, across various areas of healthcare, be it more wellness topics like nutrition and fitness, through to chronic conditions and diseases. And so we connect with a highly engaged audience at various moments of care throughout their entire journey. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I mentioned our presence. Here it is on a map. We're a regional company. We're the only company in our space in as many markets as we operate in. First founded in Vietnam, second Indonesia, Myanmar, and then we went to Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, then Taiwan, India, and then our latest market, the Philippines, launched about 2 months ago. And so we're the largest platform at the moment in the region. We're a web-based platform. We have 29 million unique users monthly. This serves 60 million monthly page views. Over the last 4 years across our various languages, we've actually now produced over 100,000 medically reviewed pieces of content. This covers, as I mentioned, the full spectrum of health topics. And testament to the demand for this type of content and the quality of our content, 81% of our users are actually coming to us organically. And what that means is they actually search for something on Google to find us. And then we have 14 million social media followers as well. So we engage across multiple assets. I touched on this. We cover the much more chronic conditions and treatments, as well as much more lifestyle, life stage, and gender-specific topics focused on healthy living, pregnancy, parenting. So much more of the proactive prevention as opposed to treatment diagnosis. And really focusing on how do we engage our audience. So it's not just about how many people we have, but how deep is our relationship and our engagement with them. And you can see some very high level statistics here on the depth of engagement we have with our audience. We have health tools, which garner 250,000 monthly uses. Anyone who lands on this tool is 98% likely to complete the tool. What that means is they get some output in terms of a result of the tool, and they can take that away with them and read more information around what that means for their health and how they can improve their health and things like this. So really focused on deepening our relationship with the audience. And how we do it, we now have 270 staff across Southeast Asia and Asia. Half of those are content focused, so about 120, 130 people are daily focused on producing the content that we have on our platforms. And we partner with over 250 local specialists across our various markets who are healthcare professionals in a certain domain, whether it's pharmacists or it's GPs or it's oncologists or nutritionists. We partner with them to ensure that the content that we produce is not only credible and relevant for the market, but it's also answering the key questions that they get on on an ongoing basis from patients and consumers in the region. So it's really about how do we serve our audience with the best information possible, and it wouldn't be possible without our network and relationship with the medical industry and the healthcare professionals. So I think that covers the brief introduction. I'll pass over to Graeme to take you on the next slides.
Great, thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. So Dave, I take it you'll jump in, I'll plow on otherwise and share our thoughts with the group. All righty, so let's kick it off. So we'd like to propose today that we focus on the experience that consumers have along the journey. I think we do speak often of the consumer journey, we speak less often of the consumer experience. So that's really, really important that we look at the empowered health consumer and their experiences throughout their entire health and wellness journey. We're going to break this into three parts, and its first part starts with the premise that health is always on. It's 24/7. It's not there when we're running campaigns. It's there all day, every day, and consumers are searching for information and support, and we need to be there, obviously, to engage in the most relevant way. So in that context, it's really looking at how do we move from the journey to the experience, and what are some of the things we need to be thinking about there, and then giving us the ability to create meaningful engagement throughout that journey. So just going to jump to a couple of trends that we feel have really shaped the world. This is pre-COVID. I'm just going to intentionally leave COVID out at this point, but up to 2019, two big things were happening in this part of the world. One was GDP has almost doubled and will be predicted to double by the year 2024 in the decade prior. So that essentially means more disposable income, more access to healthcare, and we know health and wellness is a primary consumption in this part of the world. The second one is internet penetration, again, almost doubled. And this is obviously providing consumers with access to information at their fingertips. We love this quote because it's clearly something we do all the time. We see a product, we hear about a product, we search for it. But what's interesting is that, today we're not behind the competition, we're not behind the technology, we're behind the consumer. The consumer is always a step ahead of us, particularly when it comes to their search for health and wellness. And we are playing catch up in order to chase them around and really find them just at that right point in time when we can truly add value and truly provide something that's going to move them along in that journey. So health begins with search. There's 1 billion health questions every day asked on Google. It's just astounding. So 5% of all searches are health related. And in 2019, this is pre-COVID, this is probably doubled from the number we're seeing on the screen now, but searches are up 140% in 2019 for self-care. So self-care was already a very upwardly trending search category. And in terms of accessing hospitals and clinics, that's tripling in terms of Google's role in helping people find the right service provider. So it's really about the rise of the health consumer, and 80% of empowered health consumers are searching online for a topic. So we've got to be there where and when they're searching and providing useful, relevant, and empowering content. Where do you look when you feel unwell? Online search. It's ahead of family and friends. It's look at hospitals and clinics at 8%. So online search is the go-to place for health information. And you're looking at conditions, number one, then treatment, then products, almost at equal importance. And when talking to doctors about a specific drug or a treatment plan, where do they get the knowledge from? From the internet. More so than doctors, family, friends, pharmacists, and of course television is way down the ranking. So online is where health search starts, and online is really the start of any consumer's journey. It's also the last point of the journey, because we know that consumers are going into store with 90% of them having smartphones at their side 24/7, but 80% of them almost looking at product reviews in store. And 90% of them claim to use the smartphone to help make a health purchase decision in store. So they're looking really for a conversation, not a piece of advertising, and they don't trust company websites as the source of that information. So really it's, I guess, a strategy around moving from what has been sort of traditional brand-based, campaign-based advertising. So really having peaks and troughs based on sort of what we did last year, based on budgets available, or based on seasonality, and underpinning it with what we call sort of always on demand, because this is really where the consumers are 24/7. So how do we make sure that we're underpinning and supporting or propping up the campaign work, which is incredibly important, but with an always on presence? Jumping on to COVID, clearly we see in any survey what's led your digital transformation. Clearly, it's COVID, and COVID has accelerated these trends even further. And we know that health searches have doubled in the March to May period of 2020. And the other important trend is, of course, the acceleration of telemedicine, with people avoiding going to clinics and hospitals and trusting sort of online consultations way more than they did pre-COVID. So these are some of the important considerations when we're looking to connect with consumers on their health and wellness journey. I think what we see is really a global phenomenon, and certainly here in Asia Pacific across all ages, races, cultures, is the search queries are very personal. So they're searching in a very specific way. We track here at Hello Health 1.5 million different keywords when it comes to looking at search trends. So every search is incredibly personal, and they're looking for a specific support, information, some sort of content, some sort of service to help them answer that 24/7.
Graeme, sorry, just on that. So do you see big differences? I mean, I think we all understand that we're all asking stuff a lot more, and etc. Do you see a lot of differences between the different markets you work in terms of the trust value that they put in these online advice, etc.? Is there cultural differences, or is there differences by demographics, etc., that you notice the way people react to this?
Well, yeah, a couple of top of mind ones. I mean, I think the idea that internet is the primary source remains consistent across all markets. It's double the next nearest, most trusted source.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, we look at Cambodia and Myanmar, it's all social there. Right. So it's, I trust Facebook for my content, for my health information, more so than a website. Right. So it's much more of a cultural nuance, I guess. But the net as the first port of call is certainly true across all markets. In terms of trust, I think we have to just draw some, I guess, some implications of that. They're going there really to search for one of the most important aspects of their life, which is their health and their wellness. I know Chris has got a couple of points on trust. Do you want to jump in here, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. In general, we see from the data, or at least, that it seems a lot of people are trusting, you know, online platforms and resources for information, and this is shown just by the sheer volume of search, but also the growth rate of search. We also see across our social media and from our content a huge number of people sharing the content with their friends, both privately as well as publicly, actually. And so we see, you know, combining these trends, you see that a lot of people are quite trusting of online sources, perhaps often, you know, too trusting. We've seen, obviously, in times of COVID, a lot of misinformation being shared and going viral. And so we see that, you know, sort of a two-edged sword. It's good in one hand when people get the right information in their hands, but at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation. And so how do you know what to trust? I think that's a really important thing to think about as well. And so, yeah, I mean, we see a lot of forums in Asia are quite popular, specifically with mums and that sort of community and target audience. And at the same time, we see a lot of, you know, dangerous information shared, and this can be detrimental not just to individuals' health, but actually also to the brands and the companies that operate in the space. I have a lot of sort of clients and partners that have, you know, had serious business impact through misinformation being shared, perhaps around their product or something like this. So, and to Graeme's point, yeah, we saw huge growth in search, especially around COVID time, questions and activity on social, and then obviously the growth in telemedicine as well as e-commerce has been huge over the period. So I think my sense is that people were never lacking trust, but it was more of a sort of a taking time to access and sort of demand and understanding of these services that really was sort of underlying in terms of not showing huge growth for telemedicine over the years, but we now see with the demand for it and the necessity that people are quite willing to adopt it quite quickly.
Yeah, I find that really interesting about, obviously I've seen this in other categories as well, you know, all sorts of things, food delivery at home, etc., right, and all sorts of e-commerce. But I think that just that way in which, I guess you could say, crisis causes response, right? So people are more worried, and it's a heightened worry. But I just wanted to ask again about, you know, what you were saying about that in terms of, you see this massive jump, but there's also that massive jump in risk, because we've seen some terrible abuses of these sorts of systems and bad information, and, you know, what is the truth and what's not, right? So how, you know, as people that are in this marketplace, how do you how do you vet things? I mean, how do you try to ensure that, you know, you're doing the right thing, or, you know, that you're not going to get caught out by fake information, or, you know, people swapping things around? I guess I'm asking, like, what kind of controls you put in place for that, right? Apart from the fact that you look like two really honest guys, you know.
Yeah, from a sort of Hello Health perspective, we have already pretty stringent medical review process for the information that gets published on our platforms. This goes from, one, not just the training of the writers and the teams that we have in our company, but also you know, the library of sources that we reference being quite strict and only really referencing medical journals and trusted sources that are online, like WHO and other government resources. So for us, it's about quality over quantity. It's about making sure that each piece we do publish is correct and accurate. It's sort of not jumping the gun, and it's making sure that we do the appropriate research to publish the correct information, which we know then will be long lasting, right? And so it won't sort of spike our traffic, but it's going to be evergreen in terms of its use for people. So we implemented a business continuity planning during that time. With all the remote working, obviously our processes changed in terms of I was no longer sitting next to my writers and the medical staff in the office. And so making sure that we had the systems and the processes and the tracking in place, which we already had because we're always quite a digital organization. That certainly helped us in continuing the level of quality that we can provide. And then at the same time, we have quite a wide network, as I showed earlier, of medical professionals and relationships with hospitals and pharma. So there's a lot of connections we have in the industry that enable us to get the latest information that's backed by science and really focus on publishing only correct information. Yeah,
I think it's true to say, Chris, as well, that Google keeps us honest, because in order to rank organically and to rank on page one, their stringent algorithms means you've got to have quality, trustworthy, fully referenced content in order to be there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you'll see a lot of obviously Facebook and Google, the two big ones, but their work on sort of fake news and specifically around COVID has been really quite stringent, actually, and it even made it generally quite hard if you're not a government entity or WHO to have content being showed up, actually. So yeah, it's a great point, Graeme.
I think it's quite interesting. Some of the dipstick work with consumers sort of indicates that COVID has done us all a favor in this respect, because it's really highlighted the prevalence and the gravity around misinformation in health. I think up until that sort of mass forwarding of inaccurate content hit everybody on the planet, and now people are much more cautious about who they're trusting, which I think has done platforms like ours a favor in that respect.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. So look, in that context, with health is always on, the journey begins online. We just want to really take a step back and look at the consumer journey. And we've really challenged, I guess. It's not a term that we're particularly favorable towards, because it does really, just by its definition, almost fail to embrace the experience. It is very much about the A to B journey, the geographical journey, or the physical journey of the consumer. We spend a lot of time, particularly in pharma, looking at where the patient is as opposed to what they're thinking, feeling, and doing. The other big mistake that we see happening often is a failure to inform it with robust insight. You cannot start this process unless you truly understand the dynamics of the consumer context. And I've seen many, journey mapping workshops that just are based on gut feel from the people in the room. The assumption that it's one template, it's one journey, and it's linear, I think is a trap. It's useful to present the results in a template because it's a way to communicate the outcome. But when we're there around a boardroom trying to figure out what the journey looks like, it could be multiple journeys. It could be, it won't fit a template necessarily, and it's certainly not linear. I think there's also a temptation to say, well, how do we ram a message in at different touch points along the journey without really taking time to consider what is needed? What are the pain points, and what are those sort of critical moments of care where a patient or consumer is looking for something? And we saw earlier on, their search is very, very personal, and they're looking for a very, very personal response. And then when we've got it all figured out, it's not always a digital solution. We've got to look at true multi-channel marketing, online and offline, in order to really meet the needs of that consumer as they're embarking on that journey. Another trap, probably happening less often now than it did maybe 5 years ago, is we used to sort of put consumer journeys at the end of the planning process. So you do your strategy, you do your comms plan, you go, right, what are we going to do about engagement? So it becomes almost an engagement plan, but it's got to come up front, because the insights that come from a good consumer experience workshop will inform the entire strategy, for sure. And finally, I think a failure to do journeys in parallel, and often in health, we'll have an expert influencer somewhere in the mix, a pharmacist, a doctor, a nutritionist. So it's really important that we look at the journeys in parallel, and we look at those points of intersection where those journeys overlap, and look at how, what's going on in those conversations in order to choose. So you can't do these things separately. So I think in that context, we want to really try and fix up all of those sort of pitfalls that can happen. But I think recognizing that, journeys come in all shapes and sizes. The genesis of the journey, I think we all know this from a Marketing 101 course, is the sales funnel, right? So it was all about product, it's all about company, it's completely void of consumer, and it's about shoving consumers through a funnel so that you obviously get loyalty and sales at the end of it all. If only life was as simple as this, that this doesn't happen in reality, it doesn't happen in our personal lives at all. So we must understand the consumer context in order to engage with them in an effective manner. So we then tipped the funnel on its side, and it looked a bit like a journey. We put little people on there, but still it was very void of the consumer context, and it wasn't really understanding what is the consumer looking for at each point in the health and wellness journey. So then we started to build, probably a decade ago, we started to see the introduction of this idea, well, let's understand the experience a little bit more. But what didn't tend to happen, we wouldn't sort of connect them all up. So, what we've tried to do is really look at the journey as a series of connected experiences. And they're positive and they're negative. And we've really got to understand that oscillation, particularly in health. Those moments of increased anxiety, those moments where they're overwhelmed by information, the moments where they don't have enough information, moments where they don't understand what the pharmacist has told them, the pros and the cons, the ups and the downs, and definitely not doing it from a company perspective, because we know consumers don't travel down expected paths. They move freely between touch points. It's their journey, and we just got to come along for the ride. So I want to throw this one up. I don't expect you to read the content here, but really it's just to say this on the surface looks like a really nice, typical patient journey. So we've got life before the disease. We've got some sort of incident that drove them to see a healthcare professional. Some sort of tests happened. They were diagnosed. They were put on treatment. And then they went on a series of alternative outcomes, really depending on whether they were compliant or not, or whether the treatment was successful. But nowhere on this slide is there any mention of the experience. We don't know about the thinking, the feeling, the doing, the levels of anxiety. So we pulled out a different one just to sort of illustrate how a journey map can look. This is not projecting ideally, but this here is the levels of anxiety. This is the physical journey. These are the pain points. This is, I couldn't interpret the symptoms. I was overwhelmed by the amount of information. I fear the stigma of this diagnosis. No feedback from the doctor. So understanding these and really understanding the thinking, feeling, doing enables us now to connect in a much more meaningful way and really solve some of these problems for the consumer or the patient. Not all of them. And clearly we don't have marketing budgets large enough to tick off every one of these, but we can identify the ones that really, really matter, and we'll have a good commercial outcome for the company. So, as I said, they vary in form. It depends on the context, depends on business goals, but they'll end up looking something like this, right? Couple of tips here. Involve multifunctional teams. This is not a marketing job. It's not a sales job. We've got to pull everyone together. Everyone's got a point of view. Ideally, have a couple of consumers in the room with you, maybe a healthcare professional, depending on the type of journey. But the more multifunctional it is, the better the outcome. Base it on insight. We just can't do any of this. The persona, how they feel, what's their experience look like, unless we've got robust insight driving these sorts of exercises. And don't get locked into a template. Just let it flow. Really build it based on the reality of what's happening. But there are some useful guidelines. And, I put this really up for the audience as benefit in that if we had to break down the elements of what makes up a good experience map, it would really look like this. It would have three parts. What we call the lens, which is really the persona, the scenario that we're dealing with, and really what the goals and expectations are of that consumer, that customer, that patient at that point. Then there's the whole experience piece, really, and these are sort of the chunkable phases. Maybe it's pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, or so on. What they're thinking, feeling, and doing, the levels of anxiety, and this is really where we've got to spend the time and make sure we're fueling this with good insight work. Perhaps we're going back and validating it with the consumers or the patients, from which we can then pull out the insights, the pain points, and ultimately the opportunities to connect.
I really like the emphasis there in the middle on the thinking and feeling. And as I say, I think you and I probably were doing customer journeys when we first met 25 years ago, right? But,
sure, yeah.
But that thing that you're talking about, and you and I have talked about and experienced in different ways, of making sure, actually, as the way this is laid out, right in the middle is the thinking and feeling, right?
Yeah.
The rest of it is leading to that and the response to it. But unless you have that, you're really not understanding what difference you're here to make to people. So it's really good. Just talk for a minute about, mentioned about insights and stuff. So what do you find is the best sources to get to the insight? What is your preferred means of doing that?
Well, I think there's probably two answers to that. There's probably the preferred means, and then there's the reality of what we sort of do on a day-to-day basis. The reality is there's never enough insight, particularly in this category. Look, if we're doing this for McDonald's, there's millions of dollars worth of research going into understanding the customer. I saw a little piece of work from McDonald's that they did experience map just for the in-store experience, and they had a sample size of 5,000. They had Forrester inputs, AC Nielsen. They did absolutely everything just to inform that experience map. So in health, we don't often have the benefit of that much of a robust dedication, I guess, to finding these insights. So reality, we start with desk research. There's a lot of stuff online. I think some really interesting, most categories we work on, you'll have sort of syndicated studies and things that are publicly available that starts to populate this. We use our own platform. So we have 30 million consumers we can do a quick pulse survey on. We have sort of diabetes communities, oncology communities, new mum communities, and they're a really good source of information, particularly when you sort of know where they are in the journey. You can sort of fire them a couple of quick questions and really understand all of this, what they're thinking, feeling, doing, their levels of anxiety, and so on. So that's quite a good pulse on what's going on. Some more informed clients will have already done a decent piece of consumer research before engaging an organization like ours in a journey mapping exercise. Or they're willing to do a piece of research that helps inform this. And I think that's probably the best source, because you're really then building a very bespoke and specific piece or investigation, I guess, into the category, the points in the journey you're particularly wanting to investigate. So yeah, sometimes we lack it, and you just really have to make do with desk research and dipstick surveys. Sometimes you've got robust insight work being done.
Yeah, but I would imagine, as you said, having that database you've got means ready access to people.
It does. It does.
So, I would imagine, like support groups and etc. For a lot of conditions, you'd be able to quickly access what people are thinking.
I think the other good source of patient communities, consumer communities. We do a lot of work with mums and pregnancy groups and new mum groups, and just the conversations in those communities are incredibly insightful around what's concerning them, what's worrying them, their recommendations. And you can participate in those conversations and really sort of tease out some quite nice insight.
Yeah. Great. Sorry, continue. Yeah.
In fact, just one closing remark. We met a client the other day, actually, in a market who are focusing on oncology, and they're trying to find insights into cancer patients, which is of course a very, very sensitive area. And it's sort of tough to do research there. They found their most useful source of insight was patient support groups who were, in the interest of improving the cancer patient's experience, were willing to share a lot of great insight into what it's like to live with lung cancer or prostate cancer. Yeah.
Yep.
And look, and here's how it would look if you threw it all together. And I just use this only to illustrate that sometimes in the health equivalent of this isn't as robust as we need it to be. But this is Rail Europe, the experience map. You know, they've got their chunkable phases, but you know, I just love the way, you know, consumers get stuck in circles. They have these little bits here. They get stuck again here. They deviate off. You know, but thinking, feeling, experiencing, and here's all those great opportunities we've now got to connect and to do something meaningful. Okay, where does that get us to? Yeah, so I think I've said all of this now just in that conversation, but you know, we're looking at all aspects of their world essentially, and we try to check all of these off. You know, their aspirations and worries, the environment in which they're living, their behaviors, attitudes, and their friends and influences. That tends to be the sort of buckets of insight work that we're really looking to do. And not to forget the intersection between the patient and an expert influencer. This doesn't apply to all brands, but generally in health, we'll find there's a pharmacist engagement, there's a doctor, a nutritionist, and so that intersection of the patient or consumer journey and the healthcare professional journey, that's where we can really figure out how to make a meaningful impact. How do we make that conversation as productive as possible? So then how do you take all of that then and create that meaningful engagement throughout the journey? And moving it from that geographical journey to some sort of guided experience and sort of joining those experiences together. So what we would recommend in terms of orientation is to sort of, you know, look to solve these business problems by saying, look, how do we unlock these opportunities to provide a guided experience across the journey at those critical moments of care? And even though we may be focusing on one part of the journey, look at the entire journey. Because what happens upstream and downstream has a massive bearing on what we're doing in the middle. And often, you know, we will end up with a brief that focuses just on awareness or just on compliance adherence or just on the doctor-patient engagement or what's happening in pharmacy. But we tend to try to look at the entire journey because it does inform the specific point. So look, here's a typical consumer journey in health. And to illustrate the point I was trying to make earlier, yes, it all starts online. It starts with search, and it's very, very personal. And any one consumer is having numerous journeys happening in parallel, obviously about my baby, about my elderly mum, about the skin rash on my hand, about what I should be eating, how to get fit. And they're in the middle of a journey or the beginning of a journey that are happening in parallel. And all of these sort of searches are very personal. So this then enables us then to use those as what we call intent indicators, right? So the search is an intent to do something. I'm searching because I need information, I need a service, I need something fixing or some opportunity fulfilling. So what's really nice for brand marketeers is that consumers naturally discover this, and any content that is, or tool or service that's in the context of that search is desired content. It's not interruptive messaging. So we call these intent indicators, which I think is quite a nice way to look at it. And it really means that we're relying on a consumer pull for the content. It's very anticipatory in nature. And most importantly, it captures their intent, which is really, really nice, because it then means we can be connecting with them in the context in which they want to engage with that sort of information. So how would we typically do it? I'll just quickly walk you through just some considerations for, I guess, the audience as you're thinking about, next time you're trying to build a consumer engagement map or a journey. what are the sort of things we could be thinking about as we do that? And, you know, it starts with search, and clearly we want our target consumer to land on something that will build awareness or help them with prevention, or help them sort out a treatment option. And this tends to be sort of educational articles, maybe infographics, maybe video. Talked about search, social media, sort of advertising, and what we do with KOLs is sort of one bucket of things that brand marketeers need to be thinking about in that whole sort of awareness to self-relevance phase. There's a lot of opportunities there to turn that search intent into a meaningful connection. And just to sort of bring that to life, you know, what we'd recommend is to look at the content in a way that making sure it's obviously SEO optimized. That's clearly. So when they're searching, they've got to find it. That's the most important hurdle. But putting it into a format that's engaging. And this is where it varies by market and by culture. We've got some cultures that are very visual in nature, and they engage much more with infographic type content. Other cultures that engage more with articles and text. So really understanding what's going to be the most engaging format. And in markets like Myanmar and Cambodia, it's of course social media driven. Videos are incredibly powerful devices. Animation, live action, sort of expert chats, you know, patient interviews. I mean, there's a whole range of different sort of mechanisms to engage. But you know, getting a response to that intent that the consumer wants and they're searching for, we've got to think about format. That's really, really important. Yeah. The other thing is engaging them with health tools and helping them determine whether or not that information is relevant to their own personal circumstances. So for instance, a chatbot or a quiz or a survey, something that gets them to engage and to interact with that content. And probably the most productive and most useful format is a sort of a risk checker or a symptom screener. What symptom am I suffering from? Check, check, check. Oh, it could be that. Or am I at risk of developing diabetes? Check, check, check. Okay, I am at risk. I need to take action. So that's sort of, you know, taking that awareness phase into an engagement phase and using appropriate tools and devices, and then helping them take action. Okay, so I now know I'm at risk of something, or I think my symptoms may mean something. How do I find a solution to that? Now, depending on the category, it could involve booking an appointment. It could involve a telemedicine appointment. It could involve going to a wellness center or a clinic or a pharmacy or a specific location to access that type of solution. It could be a device or a vaccine or some sort of other health or wellness solution. So we are looking at sort of, you know, how do you then turn awareness into engagement? And what I would recommend is that, you know, we look at least a couple of these, because different cultures and different types of consumers engage with different content. This, obviously, the risk screener and symptom checker being the most useful because it's connected directly to the problem they've just been talking about. What that enables, of course, is we can then capture information. So we can then capture data. It could be something as simple as my email address and my due date if I'm a pregnant woman. It could involve some parameters that they've entered, some health parameters. So I now know what stage of diabetes they've got, or what sort of treatment they're on. So they will give up information which we can then capture to enable profiling and segmentation. And that's when it gets really, really interesting, because we can then start to obviously filter those leads into something that's very, very targeted and very, very precise, because we're looking obviously to convert the most useful leads into the next stage. So it may also include SEC, age, gender, geographical location. So the more filters we can put in place, the more accurate that targeting then becomes. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it enables us to retarget through a whole variety of channels. Now, you know, we would hope that they then go directly to pharmacy, directly to a healthcare professional. If they're going to do that, it's best they have something in hand. And This is something quite new that we've been experimenting with, because previously we used to rely on that new level of awareness, or the fact they've done a risk checker. I'm now aware I'll go and talk to a doctor. But what happens in that environment behind closed doors has sort of been beyond our control. So we're looking at this sort of idea where, could they print out like a referral letter? Could they do a screenshot? Could they take some sort of asset into that consultation with them to start the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And what we've heard from pharmacists and doctors, they really love this when the questions being asked here are the same questions they would have asked the patient anyway.
Right. So they maximize the 10 minutes or whatever.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. So doctors love this. They love this because in the 10 to 12 minutes they got with a patient, the first 5 go into sort of figuring out what they've got. Then they've got to select a treatment. Then they've got to explain to the patient all about the treatment and how to use it. There's never enough time. So if we can shave off a couple of minutes at the beginning and have them go in with almost a pre-diagnosis, doctors really love that. They really, really engage and are very receptive to patients that are coming in. Of course, we've then sparked a conversation, and we've sparked a conversation in the right context for the brand or the company that's sort of sitting behind this. These may or may not be useful depending on category. In consumer health, often it's straight to pharmacy to buy off the shelf. Some obviously more specialized consumer health products do go via a healthcare professional or via a pharmacy recommendation or via a nutritionist or a dietitian. So anything we can do to aid the consumer on that journey from self-relevance to fulfillment. And then you want to be sort of looking at obviously optimizing that HCP engagement and optimizing the in-store environment if it's a pharmacy purchase. So for example, that little device they take in to the doctor, how about we put a QR code on there? How about we ask the doctor or the pharmacist to scan that and then to connect to information for them? Right. So information about the disease or the treatment. It's almost like making the consumer or the patient a new sales representative, right? And this is sort of interesting in this sort of COVID world where pharmaceutical companies are having trouble accessing healthcare professionals. Can the patient become the medical rep? Can the patient go in and with this, the result of their symptom checker or their risk checker, and then connect to the doctor and then provide utility and value to the pharmacist or the healthcare professional?
I guess that would act to give the patient a bit more confidence as well, right? So
it would, particularly, because I think we're asking a lot of patients to go in and say, hey, I read about pneumococcal vaccine, I think my child needs it, or I think I may have menorrhagia. They're not going to remember that, right? I mean,
I certainly can't say it. I mean, I couldn't say what you just said, so
correct. So if it's cough and cold, if it's asthma, yeah, more than likely, but the more we can, you're right, arm that, empower that patient to have that conversation and to do it in a way that's receptive by the pharmacist, by the doctor. We're closing the loop. And we recognize this is really a gap in current journeys. It was really almost trusting the consumer to sort of go off and have that conversation by themselves. The other important point is, of course, in store, in really taking online, offline, or the other way around. We know that the majority of consumers will get on their smartphones in store and they'll compare brands, or they'll double check, is this the right thing for the problem I've got? So this is often forgotten, but really, really important to sort of take it into that point of sale. Mm-hmm. And it's just really driven by consumer behavior and driven by where they are. And then the final bit, I'm just not going to get into this today, but of course, all the obvious things in around loyalty, compliance, adherence, and even then sort of driving that empowered health consumer into their community, into their sort of mum's community, diabetes community, living with cancer community, and then sort of advocating and sharing that knowledge and that engagement that they've had. Oops, sorry, get rid of that. So look, Dave, that's sort of is what we wanted to share today.
There's a couple of things about what you just said. First of all, I have to say, a funny experience I went down to, I live near a hospital that I go down to every few months to renew the you know, the thing I need for my asthma, right? And
The inhaler.
the inhaler. And last time I was in there was somebody in that department
Yeah.
who was talking in Thai, because that's where I live, obviously. And, you know, fortunately, the hospital, everybody speaks English, it seems, so I'm okay, but most of the conversation's in Thai. It took me a minute or two to figure out. The conversation was, this person had their inhaler that they'd obviously just received, but they were arguing with the nurse, I guess it was, that they were talking to, and they had their phone out. What they were doing was, the nurse had said something like, make sure you hold it properly and do this. And this person had something on the phone that said, no, no, you should hold it the other way and squeeze up rather than squeeze down.
Mm.
I don't know, to be honest, I'm no medical expert. I have no idea if it really makes that much difference. In my experience, if I need it, I need it, right? But it was just interesting to me. They were actually getting into quite a heavy debate about what was being said on some application on the phone, right? Hopefully not you guys.
Yes.
But, or maybe it was, I don't know. But that was sort of interesting about the way in which people are actually using this stuff, even question how to use things and that sort of stuff. The other thing I want to ask you about was when we were getting ready and talking about this session, we talked about compliance a bit. And maybe you could just talk, you know, one of you could just talk for a few minutes about, you know, sometimes the biggest single issue for manufacturers and for health, you know, people is just trying to get patients to comply. How does this fit into that experience journey? And how do you see being able to help with that in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, I skipped over it, but, you know, this is the equivalent of what I showed you within the pharmaceutical world. But here, there's a lot of importance placed on this. And, you know, I think the value of the biggest challenge with adherence compliance is the lack of time up here when the patient or the consumer is meeting a pharmacist, meeting a doctor. They're just not getting enough time with the healthcare professional to be educated on how to use the product properly, or they're not fully convinced that they even need the treatment. I think a really nice example is some work we did in diabetes a couple of years ago, where diabetes patients are notoriously non-compliant with their medication, but they're very compliant with their cholesterol-lowering drugs, for example. We wanted to delve into that a little bit more. And there's a lot more denial in diabetes than there is in cholesterol. For some reason, if you're diagnosed with high cholesterol, you get a reading, you know pretty much that that's not good for you, and you get your Lipitor or whatever your anti-cholesterol product is, and they pretty much tend to stick with it. There's a very high compliance rate. Diabetics sort of are always in denial that they've actually got diabetes, primarily because there's a strong correlation with their lifestyle. Yeah. And there's a lot of self-blame, and there's a little bit of stigma. And it's almost like, I wasn't a diabetic until I came to see you, doctor, and you made me a diabetic. And they really have quite a negative relationship with both their doctor and also with their medication.
The doctor's forcing them to take away stuff they enjoy, right?
Yeah, and then they've got to change their diet. So you know, when they pick up their asthma inhaler, they've got a very good relationship with that because it helps them breathe easier. They can do things. When they pick up their medication every morning for diabetes, they just hate it. They really hate it. And they'll do anything they can to try and get out of it. They won't do their blood tests and so on and so forth. So I think it's very disease specific, and you know, one needs to delve into those reasons for non-compliance. I mean, at a macro level, yeah, there's insufficient time to educate and to really have them understand the disease they've got and why they should take their drug. Of course, they can go online for that, and they can go on sort of compliance programs and things like that. But there's often some underlying, you know, psychological issue, and it's to do with their relationship with their drug or with their disease or the stigma. But it's a really...
I think the fact that you place that inside that experience and the journey itself and the recognition of that is really important. You know, my experience working on different applications of health products and, you know, pharmaceutical and stuff is quite often it's sort of like, okay, well, we've got them to buy the damn thing, so good luck. You know, you're supposed to comply with this, right? And I think that's obviously the next big step, is actually the insight into why they're not complying, and you know, how to come across with the right messaging, etc. is part of the experience that we need to have. So
yeah, and it's mind-boggling. It applies across all categories. I mean, you know, chronic treatments for, you know, life-saving drugs, you know, have low compliance rates, and the commercial opportunity, clearly, you know, if it's 12 boxes a year and your average patient uses 4 boxes a year, you know, there's a lot of you know, unexplored opportunity. Even vaccination. I mean, if you look at cervical cancer vaccination, the vast majority of women will not take the final booster shot. So they committed to number 1, number 2, big drop off number 3. They spend close on $400 US for that series of doses, but they either forget or they don't think it's necessary. Yeah. But you know, there's a whole discipline around.
It's that mentality of I've started and I feel pretty good, so obviously I don't need to finish. Right?
Yeah, yeah. It's rooted firmly in human behaviour, and yeah, it's an interesting space to be in.
So we've got a couple of interesting questions from some of the people that are listening in. Before that, I'll drop in my last question of my own, though, because I warned you guys. You know, people that know me know that the last number of years, a big bugbear of mine is thinking about aging populations and what's happening with the over 60s and over 70s, particularly here in Asia, where, you know, it's such a big issue in so many markets. So I'm just wondering how you're seeing the journey involved in that, and how that's affecting perhaps your business, or what you're thinking, how it might affect your business going forward.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to? I've got a point of view on this. Do you want to jump onto that from the platform perspective, and I'll come in at the end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, we see healthy aging in Asia. Obviously, it's a huge topic, both from a sort of brand and healthcare industry perspective, but also from an engagement perspective, we see really high demand for this type of content. Funnily enough, I mean, on our platform, you'll find that actually only 15% of users are over the age of 45, and only 2% of users are actually over the age of 65. And so we see on our platforms, you know, much younger audiences in general. Sort of the 25 to 45s are really the bulk of our audience. I think there's a couple of reasons, you know, why this is. I mean, one, not that there's no demand for the information, but if you look at sort of smartphone penetration across Asia for over 50s, for example, you'll see in India it's only 7%, or Bangladesh is 2%. Even places like Malaysia is only 17%. So accessibility is one thing. I think, you know, aging populations don't have the access today than they perhaps may need. And I think the second thing that I see that drives this is cultural in this part of the world, at least from a perspective of, in Asia, you typically live with your parents for a long, long time, right? And so often we see that it's the caregivers or the younger generations that are actually engaging with the healthy aging content or the diseases specific to older people. And so for us, when we create our content, actually it's interesting that a lot of our focus goes into what angle are we positioning the content, and are we actually targeting the elderly population, or are we actually targeting the younger population with a view to influence the older generations? And so that's very much sort of our focus. And so you can access aging populations a bit, and we do, but actually our focus still somewhat remains on the younger generations who can influence the older relatives that they live with to either, you know, on the topic of compliance, right? It's an interesting one where if you can shout about the importance of compliance and adherence to medication, you'll see that there are often uplifts in engagement and things like this. So that's very much what we're focused on actually at Hello Health. And so when we work with brands and partners, it's often with that angle in mind, as opposed to, you know, let's go and find the older people on Facebook or wherever, because in reality, they simply don't really exist in those locations. So, you know, when coming up with strategies for marketing and reaching audiences, really got to take that into consideration.
I think what's interesting, Dave, I'm sure you've discovered this yourself, from an engagement or content perspective, the gender differences. So from some work we did, some surveys we did with the older population, men obviously more concerned with sort of psychological decline, and women more concerned with sort of physical decline, sort of a psychological physical split, which is quite interesting. And I think the other interesting thing is the greatest fear is sort of loss of autonomy, and particularly in Asian societies where the older person may be living with a child, becoming a burden or losing one's autonomy is the greatest fear, which cuts across many categories, which is sort of interesting. I think the other thing is this sort of move towards holistic views of what healthy aging encompasses: nutrition, emotional well-being, active body, sharp mind. So I think from a content perspective, when we're trying to engage that community, we sort of probably should respect some of those trends. And I think the other interesting one from another survey we did was how one ages is perceived as controllable rather than predetermined, which I think is an interesting trend. I think people.
I know from work that I've been doing with the Global Wellness Institute.
Yeah, exactly.
That's certainly true. That there's a very strong and growing perception that aging is basically self-defined in some way. And I think to what Chris said, the role of caregivers is maybe the biggest single opportunity, right? That it's the people in their 30s and 40s that have got to take care or starting to worry about their older aunts, uncles, parents, whatever. That's a huge opportunity area. I imagine we'll get. Let me just move on to a couple of the questions and a couple of the people listening in have asked. There's a good friend of ours, Lillian Susan Wilkie, who's in Germany. And she's asked the obvious questions, which is how has Corona changed consumer behaviour that you've seen, and how is it changing, particularly in terms of the OTC business? And then how's that changing the digital opportunities you react to? So have there been particular things around Corona that have affected the way you do business, for example?
Absolutely. We've done quite a bit of work trying to understand from our user base the impact. I mean, I'll let Chris talk in a second around sort of how it's impacted search and the way we've engaged with them. But, I think some of the probably 4 or 5 big trends beyond the obvious ones. I'm not going to talk about, hygiene or digital connectivity, all that stuff. But prevention is better than cure mindset has accelerated hugely. I mean, people are, and that's evident in search as well. And people are now looking really at how do I prevent, obviously not just Corona, but a whole host of health issues. Whereas before there was often a tendency to wait and then treat, right? So things like vaccination. I think what's interesting is this idea of planning for the worst. We've heard from some of our insurance partners this huge uptake in insurance because now I've got to plan for the worst. So that's a positive side effect for that particular industry. The spotlight on personal responsibility. So I think we've now seen with all of the requirements around this pandemic is it actually comes down to one's own actions for oneself and how that impacts others in society. So this whole idea of personal responsibility and sort of it's my decision, although it's often directed by law, in markets where there's much more choice, people are choosing to wear masks, people are choosing to socially distance, which would have been unheard of a year ago. Self-care, I think the whole self-care industry has taken off. And the obvious other one is telemedicine, with people being a little bit afraid to go into a clinic or to a hospital to see a doctor. They prefer a much more remote consultation. So the telemedicine providers have really benefited. And the other one I mentioned earlier was I think people realize now more than ever the prevalence and danger of misinformation. So they're a lot more judicious, I think. One just has to look at how much or how there's a big reduction now in the sort of random forwarding of misinformation around COVID. I mean, that's almost come to a grinding halt, right? Yeah. But it's impacted other aspects of health information as well.
we hope it's come to a halt and just slowing down. That's for sure.
Okay, slowing down is probably a more accurate term. But I'm sorry, one final one. The importance of immunity, I think, is interesting. The whole sort of vitamin supplement category have taken a big boost because people are now connecting sort of good future health and health preservation to the idea of immunity, which cuts across many brands. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I think on the second part of the question on sort of the extended use of digital opportunities, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, to me, it's somewhat of a forced hand to a certain degree. I mean, we saw massive growth in search, and not just for COVID specifically, but actually across the full spectrum of health. To Graeme's point, I mean, people are really taking a much more proactive stance in their health, around prevention, about living a healthier lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. And so across the board, we've seen a growth in search. I think a lot of these users were existing users of ours, right? So they're people that, you know, maybe already on the sort of digital health train, so to speak, and they're already used to searching for solutions, and perhaps they use some digital health services. But what we saw is, again, a growth in sort of what we'd say new users into the ecosystem of Hello Health. And so we see a lot of people adopting sort of new digital health services through necessity often, but perhaps what I see now is actually there's a certain degree of stickiness to these users that came through the COVID period, and sort of perhaps they've discovered the usefulness of a lot of these solutions and services, and they're sort of sticking a little bit to that. I think, you know, they've gone through a journey, they've explored new solutions they didn't know existed, or they perhaps were hesitant to try out, and now they've had some sort of you know, enjoyable or useful experience. And I see that a lot of them have now sort of adopted these into their main sort of lifestyle, whether it's, you know, even fitness trackers or home workout subscriptions and things like this. I mean, this has really spiked a lot. And so, yeah, it's quite interesting to see. I mean, we saw, you know, quite a quick drop off in terms of actual COVID related topics. So we had a really big spike for really only about 3 or 4 months. Some markets, obviously, like India, are still going. But what we see is that in totality, search has not dropped and actually increased. So search trends, I would say, in what they're searching for change. But what we've seen is an overall growth in engagement in digital health. So I think it's great for the industry, and it's great for the consumer health industry as well, because now there's, I think, a bigger pool of potential target audiences they can reach out to that are perhaps, you know, now more even willing to engage with brands through digital channels than they were pre-COVID.
Yeah, I'm sure it goes back to a crisis builds interest. It makes people seek out things, and then when they start to get some good answers about that, they start to explore other things, right, and go deeper into other areas or feel more comfortable about it. I'm sure you got introduced. A lot of people got introduced to, you know, platforms like yours because of the feet concern, and then it's like, oh, well, that's there, so I might as well ask them about why I've got the spot on my neck, that sort of stuff, something like that. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. There's one other question I wanted to just get to, which was, so Mike Harley, who's a good friend and part of the CHC group, I'll read out what he says. He really agrees with the always-on engagement requirements. I see the consumer journey and experience needs to go beyond the purchase to the usage experience. What's your feelings about that? I mean, you've mentioned the fact that eventually people either go to a pharmacy or they go online and purchase it, but how do you see this whole experience journey coming to life more at the actual purchase point? And how important is that as part of that whole experience journey?
Yeah, I missed the first part of the question, Dave. So it's the importance of the in-store.
Yeah, basically, once you take people on this experience journey to get to something, and then, you know, they get to the pharmacy, and sometimes all that learning that you guys have put into making the experience great or understanding the experience sort of falls short at the pharmacy experience. Or
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So what we've tried to put a lot of effort into, and you know, I don't think we're 100% there, and I think this is something that we'd want to be doing in partnership with clients, is what is that device that is it a little, is it a screenshot, is it a little something that's on the smartphone, is it a, you know, a printable PDF? Taking something in to that conversation is both welcomed by the pharmacist, because we've spoken to a number of pharmacists about this, and also aids the consumer in sort of at least starting the conversation, but starting it off in an accurate manner. So, you know, I've just done this risk checker. Look, here, pharmacist, I think I may have this problem, or I think these symptoms, this rash on my hand, may be dermatitis. That step is often missing. We're often, you know, relying on the consumer to have, you know, we've built some awareness, we've built some self-relevance, we've educated them, and then we just shove them off and we leave them alone to go and have that conversation. And they'll get distracted by, you know, a point of sale item, or they'll get to the shelf and realize there's a multitude of choices. So I think the conversation starter with the pharmacist is an important trick that I don't think has been properly nutted out yet. And of course, we know that most consumers make their decision in store. Despite what's happened on the journey to date, 80% of consumers will make their decision in store.
Right.
So there's a big chance of a drop-off. So that online, offline piece is really, really important, and vice versa. So what can we do at the point of sale? Is there something we can do just to, you know, reassure them? Or they can even do their symptom checker there, or their risk checker at the point of sale if they haven't been on the entire journey with us.
Right.
So, you know, I think, yeah, we could lose 80% of the traffic in the store if we don't get that right.
Chris, I got one business more related question for you. You mentioned that, I know you've only been open in the Philippines quite recently, and you guys have expanded very fast in the few years you've existed across the different markets you're in. As you move into a different market, as you explore it and then move into a different market, what's the key barriers or problems that you have to overcome in terms of deciding, okay, we're going into the Philippines next, or, you know, we're going to go into, I don't know, Timor next, or wherever it is, right? So how are there, is it technical barriers? Is it like marketing issues? What are the barriers?
That's a good question. I think we always, I mean, in our sort of expansion, I think we've always been 100% behind the decision to go into a new market. I think we've built the organization very much to scale geographically, both in terms of our technology, the way in which we approach hiring and management and all these kind of things. I think when we're looking to a new market, we base it on quite a depth of, I would say, research. So by the time we've made the decision to actually enter a new market, we're 100% convinced that it's the right market, and it's the right time, and it's the right everything. Then it's about finding the right people to build it with us. And so I would say historically it was a lot easier. I mean, I've lived in 5 or 6 countries now in Southeast Asia. I've moved every year for the last 6 or 7 years, setting up various offices for Hello Health, and obviously finding the right people at the beginning has been, you know, the difference between success and less success, or even, you know, sometimes failure to get off the ground very quickly. So I think that's the biggest consideration. And we found fantastic people across the region, and, you know, the Philippines we've launched without even going there due to COVID. So we made the decision to launch the Philippines. We started hiring, and then COVID hit, and so we've never actually been, but now we have a team of 8 to 10 people on the ground in the Philippines. The traffic is going fantastically. We had 250,000 users last month on the platform. We have over 100,000 social media followers. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. The key barriers outside of that are just really understanding local nuance. data really helps with this, both from our existing data pool of other markets, where you'll find that there's a huge amount of similarities between people in different markets. And then it's second about that local nuance. And so everyone we hire in the markets is typically local to those markets, and that's a key differentiator, I think, with what we do and some of the other health technology companies. And because we're so focused on local content and local context, that's critical to success. And so we wouldn't be able to do it without having the people on the ground from those markets, who really understand their audience, helping us build that strategy. So being a very digital business and having sort of 4 to 5 years of content developed and data, it's definitely making it easier these days than it used to be. Hopefully we're making less of the same mistakes than we used to be. But yeah, those are the main considerations. How do you get the right people in that have the right mindset and share the same vision? And then it's how do you build out that content that you're not copying and pasting, but you're sort of building it from the ground, but at the same time trying to leverage as much of what we have already to accelerate the.
As you said, understanding the context of how it's going to fit in locally, and maybe how it's going to be tweaked locally comes into it.
Yeah, it took us about I'd say less than 3 months to launch the Philippines, and we have over 1,000 pieces of content already on the platform that have been medically checked. So yeah, we try and move quite fast, actually. Not possible without the technology and the data that we have.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I think that's the key questions. There might be a couple of others that I missed, and what we'll do is we will kindly ask Chris and Graeme if we've got some other questions that come in to answer them, and we'll send them back to people over the next few days. So personally, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Graeme. It's been really interesting. There's a couple of ideas there that I'll steal. I'm sure everybody else on the call will steal as well. And I'm sure a number of people will get back in touch with you guys for more information and try to see how you can help. So I don't know, Sheila, do you want to explain what happened here?
Yes, Dave. Thanks so much, Dave, Graeme, Chris, for that very insightful presentation and exchange. I can say you have really, truly unlocked the critical moments of care. Thank you, thank you. And to everyone, thank you. Maraming salamat, sheshe. Thank you. But before you go, please allow us to invite you to our next 2021 Health and Wellness Will Be Different webinar series in September 3. Our topic is Getting Creative with Health Messaging. We will have Mr. Jeremy Perot as our speaker. Jeremy has been at the leading edge of the changing the way the health world advertises its brands and products. In our next month's Consumer Healthcare Training Academy session, Jeremy will be joined by his sometimes strategic partner, who was also our moderator earlier, Mr. Dave McCaughan. So Jeremy and Dave will be also joined by our dearest Steve Sowerby, our co-founder of the Consumer Healthcare Training Academy. Jeremy, Dave, and Steve will review and discuss where they think creativity in health marketing is going and what still needs to be done in order to bring its messages alive to people, patients, and professionals. We are really looking forward to seeing you again next month. Again, Graeme, Dave, Chris, thanks so much. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye for now, and have a great weekend, everyone.